the British boarding party went on board the Altmark, and there was a little bit of fighting, and I believe 6 Germans were killed and so on. But when the boarding party opened the hatches of the Altmark and shouted down to the prisoners down there, "The Navy's here!" This was reported, and the next day, of course, when it was reported in the British papers, all the headlines, "The Navy's here," was all in the British headlines, and it was, of course, considered a great triumph. As early as 6 days after we declared war on Germany, Winston Churchill, who was then First Lord of the Admiralty, not Prime Minister, decided that we should have a barrage of mines stretching right the way from the Orkney Islands in north of Scotland right across to Norway. This was mainly in order to prevent German ships coming down what are known as the leads, which is the stretch right the way down near the coast through the fjords, where their merchant ships were bringing iron ore from Narvik. A plan was devised mainly in France of using the excuse of sending French and British troops to Finland through Norway, through Sweden. And at the same time, attacking Baku in the south of Russia, to have this 2,000 miles apart two-prong attack on Russia. I've got the official accounts, reports of Parliament. This is the Prime Minister, who is Neville Chamberlain. And he promised Field Marshal Mannerheim, the President of Finland, that an expedition would be ready by May. And that this expedition would consist of, as far as we were concerned, of 100,000 troops. And he actually told the House of Commons that no effective expedition could arrive in Finland except by passing through Norway and Sweden. They would enlarge the area of the war and would turn Sweden into a battlefield. I was in the boiler room, in my engine room overalls, when suddenly the petty officer who was with me answered the phone, and he told me that the captain wanted to see me. So I went up to the captain's cabin, and there he was surrounded by his officers. I'd never seen so many naval officers before. And he said, "Oh, we have heard that you are a journalist, or we're a journalist in peacetime." I said, "Yes, yes, sir." And so he then said, "I suppose you reported murders and things." I said, "No, sir, only a suicide so far." And so he asked a few other questions, and that was the end of it. And that was my only, at that time, it was my only connection with Vian. At the same time as we were being told by, I don't think it was Vian, I think it was by the first lieutenant, that the invasion of Norway was just about to take place, or was taking place. And so it was these British troops, which originally were for Finland, which were then embarked on these ships and taken over to Norway. We took the rear guard of the British Army, the very last 36 soldiers of the 5,400 who had to be evacuated from Namsos. We got into the open sea, I suppose, about 8 o'clock, and the first planes started coming over then.
Bei Namsos blieben unsere Stukas dem fliehenden Feind, der sich bei Nacht und Nebel eingeschifft hatte, dicht auf den Fersen.
Oil, of course, came from the burst tanks of the Bison, so that the sea was covered with oil, and certainly it was caught alight. And the French sailors were swimming through the flames, and we picked them up, and they were in a terrible state when we picked them up and brought them on board, and many of them they went underneath. They couldn't stand the sight of seeing their comrades in their state. And I definitely remember us firing at the wreck, because of course it's a rule of the sea that you can't leave a wreck floating on the surface of the water, because it's a danger to other shipping, and therefore it's got to be sunk whether there are men on board it or not. And I distinctly remember these men who had not jumped into the water clustered on the stern of the ship, which by this time of course was tilting down like this. And one of them, I just distinctly remember being up one of the masts and the stern of the ship and kind of waving to us, more or less, I suppose, telling us, for God's sake, stop firing on us. And that was it. I didn't actually see her sink because I must have gone below on watch.
I covered Spain. I filmed the bombings of Shanghai and Nanking. I saw large parts of Helsinki and Viipuri blown out of existence. But nothing I have seen in Spain, in China, or in Finland had 1/10 the shattering effect of that trip back from Norway.
Ein neuer Bombenregen. Treffer auf das Hinterdeck.
At that stage they were actually trying to lower one of the boats, and there were quite a number of men in one of the lifeboats, and then the must have been the Captain Vian, I suppose, who countermanded this and said that there was another destroyer coming alongside, and therefore the boats had to come in again. The men started going overboard into the two destroyers, so we pulled away, and the Afridi, she actually took quite a long time before she went. She didn't go down.
Didn't go down immediately. No.
We were struck around about 2 o'clock, and she didn't go down for about 2:45, I think, something like 2:40. So that was that.
That is the end. The British and French troops are now back home. They showed their courage on the frozen front and through the heavy bombings you've just seen. As an American, I was proud to be with these men of the Allies who are fighting the fight for freedom.